The phone rang at 6:12 a.m., the kind of hour where nothing good ever comes from the other end, and by the time the call ended, my entire life had quietly split into a before and an after. I had just inherited a 3,200-acre lake ranch, a stretch of land so massive it sounded fake, like something pulled from a movie script rather than my real life. The attorney's voice was calm, almost casual, as if people inherited private lakes and endless shoreline every day. But what he said next made my stomach tighten. "There's an HOA situation," he warned, pausing just long enough to let the words sink in. At the time, I laughed. How bad could an HOA really be on a ranch that big? That laugh would not last long. When I first drove through the iron gates, the ranch felt unreal. The lake reflected the sky like glass, deer scattered across the fields, and the silence carried a weight that felt powerful and peaceful. This land had been in my family for decades, passed down quietly, carefully, with one unspoken rule: never let outsiders control it. I didn't know it yet, but that rule was about to be tested. Within 48 hours of my arrival, a white SUV rolled up my gravel drive without warning. No call. No appointment. Just confidence. The woman who stepped out wore sunglasses too big for her face and a smile that never reached her eyes. She introduced herself as the HOA president. She didn't ask how I was settling in. She didn't offer condolences for the loss that led me here. Instead, she handed me a folder thick with papers and said, "You'll need to come into compliance immediately." According to her, my inherited ranch violated multiple HOA rules: access roads, dock usage, shoreline fencing, even visual harmony of the trees. I stared at her, genuinely confused. This ranch existed long before the HOA did. She nodded as if she'd heard that excuse 1,000 times. "That doesn't matter," she replied. "We have authority now." That was the moment I realized this wasn't about rules. It was about control. And the line they crossed next would cost them everything they thought they owned. 2 days after that first encounter, I received an official-looking envelope taped directly to my front door, like a warning posted in an old Western movie. Inside was a formal violation notice from the HOA, stamped, signed, and written with absolute certainty. They claimed my private access road crossed community-controlled land, my dock extended beyond approved dimensions, and my ranch signage was non-compliant with neighborhood aesthetics. Each violation came with a fine, already dated, already due. The total was more than some people earn in a month. That was when confusion turned into irritation. I called the number listed, expecting at least a conversation. Instead, I got a lecture. The HOA secretary spoke slowly, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. She told me the board had reviewed my property and voted unanimously that I would need to comply or face escalating penalties. When I explained, again, that this land predated the HOA by decades, she sighed and said, "That's not how this works anymore." That sentence stuck with me. Not how this works anymore. As if history could be erased with a clipboard. Over the next week, their presence became constant. Cars parked near my gates. Drones buzzing over the lake. A compliance officer walked my shoreline with a camera, snapping photos without permission. When I confronted him, he smiled and said, "We're just documenting." Documenting what? My own land? It felt invasive, calculated, like they were trying to provoke me into making a mistake. And then came the letter that crossed from annoyance into outright threat. The HOA claimed they had the right to restrict my access to the lake unless I paid outstanding fines and submitted a development plan for approval. My access to my lake. That was the moment the line was crossed. I drove straight to the county records office, a place that smelled like old paper and dust, and asked for everything tied to my property. Deeds. Surveys. Easements. What I found made my heart race. The HOA's boundary map didn't match the county's at all. Not even close. Entire sections of my ranch were mysteriously labeled as community land on their documents. That night, another SUV pulled up unannounced. This time, it wasn't just the president. It was 3 board members, standing in my driveway like they owned it. The president spoke first. "We can make this easy," she said. "Or very difficult." She hinted at liens, legal action, even forced access changes. Her tone was calm, rehearsed. They had done this before. They expected me to fold. Instead, I smiled. Because they had no idea what I'd just discovered. And they definitely didn't know who I'd already called. The lawyer I called didn't gasp or laugh when I explained the situation, which told me immediately that this wasn't his first HOA nightmare. Instead, he asked one question that changed everything. "Do you have the original survey?" 2 hours later, I was standing in a storage room on the ranch, digging through decades of files my family never threw away. Deeds from the 70s. Hand-drawn maps. Old correspondence with the county. And then I found it. The original boundary survey, stamped, signed, and recorded long before the HOA even existed as an idea. According to that survey, the HOA had zero authority over my lake, my roads, or my shoreline. None. Not a single inch. Their claimed community land was a fabrication, a quiet expansion they'd been getting away with for years because no one challenged it. The lawyer told me something that sent a chill down my spine. "If they filed these altered maps knowingly," he said, "this isn't just overreach. It's fraud." Before we could make a move, the HOA escalated. I woke up to construction tape blocking one of my access roads, complete with a sign reading "temporarily closed by HOA order." That road was how I reached the northern section of the ranch. They were testing how far they could push me. I tore the tape down myself and kept every piece. An hour later, I received an email accusing me of interfering with HOA property. That accusation would become their biggest mistake. We responded with a formal cease and desist, attaching certified copies of the original survey and county records. The HOA replied within minutes, dismissing everything as outdated documentation. Outdated? That's when my lawyer smiled. He had already contacted the county assessor, the zoning office, and the land use board. By the end of the day, 3 separate agencies were reviewing the HOA's filings. Quietly. The next board meeting was announced as mandatory for me to attend. When I arrived, the room was packed. Homeowners. Board members. Even a local reporter sitting in the back. The HOA president opened with confidence, outlining my violations on a projector screen. Then my lawyer stood up and requested the floor. He presented the original survey, side by side with the HOA's altered map. The room went silent. The president's face drained of color. Because in that moment, everyone saw it. The line they crossed. And the consequences closing in. The silence in that room felt heavier than any argument ever could. The projector still hummed softly as my lawyer pointed out the differences line by line, showing how the HOA's map quietly swallowed hundreds of acres that never belonged to them. Homeowners leaned forward in their seats. Whispers spread. The HOA president tried to interrupt, but the damage was already done. You could see it in her eyes. This was not going according to the script she was used to controlling. My lawyer didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He explained that submitting altered boundary maps to the county wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. He explained that issuing fines, blocking access, and threatening liens on land they didn't control opened the HOA to massive liability. Then he dropped the sentence that made the room gasp. Several county agencies are now reviewing this matter independently. The word independently mattered. It meant this was no longer something the HOA could bury in a closed meeting. The president called for a recess, but homeowners started asking questions. Loud ones. One man stood up and asked if the HOA had been collecting dues for land it didn't own. Another demanded to know if their own property lines were accurate. A woman near the back asked if this was why lake access rules kept changing every year. Panic spread faster than control ever could. Within 48 hours, the story was everywhere locally. Online forums lit up. Former board members started speaking anonymously. One admitted the maps had been adjusted years ago to simplify management. Another claimed legal counsel warned them but was ignored. The county issued a formal notice requesting all HOA land records for audit. That word again. Audit. It echoed like a countdown. Then came the lawsuits. Not just mine. Homeowners filed claims for improper fines, restricted access, and misrepresentation. The HOA's insurance provider withdrew coverage pending investigation. Vendors stopped answering calls. Board members resigned one by one, each trying to distance themselves before the full collapse. The president released a statement blaming administrative errors, but no one was listening anymore. I stood on the dock that evening, watching the sun sink into the lake, and felt something unexpected. Relief. Not victory. Relief. Because this was never about revenge. It was about drawing a line and refusing to let it be crossed. The HOA tried to control land it never owned, power it never earned, and people who finally said no. And the final consequences were just beginning. The official letter arrived on a Monday morning, delivered by certified mail and stamped with the county seal. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to the HOA. And once that letter was issued, everything changed. The county formally suspended the HOA's authority over all land disputes until the audit was complete. That meant no fines, no enforcement, no orders, and no intimidation tactics. For the first time since I inherited the ranch, the silence felt clean instead of tense. Investigators began showing up within days. County land officers, zoning officials, and an external audit firm requested access to records the HOA had guarded for years. Board members who once walked around with confidence now avoided eye contact. Some claimed they were just volunteers. Others said they were misinformed. None of that mattered anymore. Paper trails don't care about excuses. The audit uncovered more than anyone expected. The HOA had been collecting dues based on inflated land calculations, charging homeowners for maintenance of areas they didn't legally control. Access restrictions to the lake were enforced using rules that were never properly approved or recorded. Fines were issued using authority that simply didn't exist. Every discovery added pressure, and that pressure cracked the illusion of power they had relied on for years. Then came the legal consequences. The county referred multiple findings to the state level for further review. Civil penalties were discussed. Criminal liability was quietly mentioned. The HOA's legal counsel withdrew, citing conflicts. That single move spoke louder than any press release. Homeowners began demanding emergency meetings, refunds, and resignations. Some demanded the HOA be dissolved entirely. The president, once so confident in my driveway, didn't attend the final meeting. Instead, a short email was sent out announcing her resignation effective immediately. No explanation. No apology. Just an exit. 2 more board members followed within hours. The remaining members voted to freeze all operations. The HOA that once threatened to control my inherited ranch couldn't even control its own inbox. Standing on the ranch, watching surveyors remark the true boundaries, I realized how close this came to ending very differently. If I hadn't questioned that first folder of papers, if I had paid those fines quietly, this overreach would have become permanent. That's how it works. Power grows when no one pushes back. But this story wasn't finished yet. Because the final decision about the HOA's future was coming. And it would change the entire community forever. The final hearing took place in a packed county chamber, the kind of room where decisions permanently change lives, property, and power. Former board members sat quietly on one side, homeowners on the other, and county officials at the front with stacks of documents that told the real story far better than any speech ever could. This wasn't emotional anymore. It was factual. And facts are merciless. The county's conclusion was clear. The HOA had knowingly misrepresented land boundaries, enforced rules without legal authority, and collected money under false pretenses. Their authority over lake access, shoreline control, and surrounding acreage was officially revoked. Permanently. The HOA would not be restructured. It would not be reformed. It was dissolved. Just like that, years of unchecked power ended with a single vote and a signed order. Refunds were mandated. Fines were voided. Ongoing lawsuits were allowed to proceed. Several cases were referred for further legal review. The community, once divided by fear of enforcement letters and surprise violations, finally breathed as one. People spoke to each other openly again. Neighbors who hadn't made eye contact in years started talking on the shoreline, comparing stories of pressure and threats they had quietly endured. As for the ranch, the county formally reaffirmed its boundaries using the original survey. The lake, the roads, the land all mine, just as they had always been. No HOA oversight. No approvals. No interference. When the final markers were placed, I walked the shoreline alone, listening to the water lap against the dock, thinking about how close this land came to being swallowed by paperwork and silence. The HOA crossed one line too many because they assumed no one would fight back. That assumption cost them everything. And the lesson wasn't just for them. It was for everyone watching. Authority only exists when it's legitimate. Rules only matter when they're lawful. And power only survives when it isn't abused. This story didn't end with cheering or celebration. It ended with something better. Clarity. The truth documented. The land protected. And a community reminded that standing up early matters more than fixing things late. So if there's one thing this experience taught me, it's this: read every document, question every demand, and never assume someone else's confidence equals their right. Because sometimes, the loudest authority in the room is standing on nothing at all. And that's how the HOA that tried to control a 3,200-acre ranch destroyed itself.